Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another book review from the Tales to Give You Goosebumps series. And it's book number 5, More and More Tales to Give You Goosebumps. Now for this book being one of the more rare / expensive books, it's a common theme that these more expensive ones are kind of letdowns. And this one is no exception. And it's a bummer. For the Tales to Give You Goosebumps series, what I've read so far, I only have one book left after this. I am not a fan all that much of this series. And it's a shame because I'm historically a fan of anthology stuff. And I like short stories in other forms and other series. But in Goosebumps, I feel like these short story collections are kind of half and half for me. You know, there are some that I like, some books overall, but for the most part, I guess this is like 3 out of 5 that I've read. I only have one left after this, where I think I might enjoy maybe 3 to 4 stories, and the rest I can just care less for. Now, this book, compared to some other books I wasn't a fan of, like book number 2 or book number 6, those books had at least 2 or 3 really, really solid standouts in both of those collections. And some really bad ones and some more middle ground. And those got, pretty mediocre scores for me. This one is just a mediocre book through and through. I don't think there's anything terrible in this. No worst story ever in this, in my opinion. But a lot of them are just meh to okay to decent at best. I think there's one true standout in this book and a couple of them that I kind of enjoyed. But this one was probably the biggest letdown out of all of them. You know, the cover, right? I love me some Tim Jacobus art, but this has to be one of the silliest Tim Jacobus covers in Goosebumps history. I'm not a big fan of this. And the theme is another summertime theme Tales book, and I kind of wish they just did something else here. But for the most part, I think this one is probably the most forgettable book. And I'll get into, why near the end of the video. I'm getting ahead of myself. But this is a more expensive Goosebumps book, right? This is one of the rarer, tougher to acquire ones. If you're fortunate enough to get this in your collection, maybe try it out and see which stories are in here that, you might like them, right? If you want to check them out. I want to go out of my way to recommend it, but you can try it. I think there's one solid one I would recommend this for, and I'll tell you which one it is in the video. So, like the rest of the Tales to Give You Goosebumps books, this book features 10 short stories, mostly centered around the summertime theme. And the first story is called The Haunted Guitar. Now, The Haunted Guitar is about this, these 2 kids. It's, inclement weather out one day during the summertime, and they're in a part of town they're not familiar with. And trying to dodge this big storm coming in, they pass by this store that looks kind of haunted, right? There's stuff in there that looks to be melted to the ground, like these 2 old guitars and a drum kit. And to escape the rain, one of the kids decided to go in there and just, hide from the rain. And once they see the instruments, I think the main character is a boy. I forget the names of pretty much all the characters featured in this book, so I'm just going to call them whatever, right? So one of the kids take the liberty to take one of the guitars. And their friend is like, you shouldn't do that. That's not right. That's not ethical. And they're like, who's going to care? This store has been closed down for years, presumably. Nobody's going to miss this thing, right? So he takes the guitar home, and he can't wait to play it. And his dad is like, where'd you get that guitar from? And he's like, oh, my friend gave it to me. And his dad's like, okay, cool. I can't wait to hear you play on it, because if you like it, I'll buy you your own guitar. So the kid's like, oh yeah, this is a win-win. I got this cool vintage guitar from this store for free that I stole, and then my dad's going to buy me a guitar. Well, he starts hearing some weird things around the guitar, like things are playing, right? And one night he's sleeping, and he gets woken up to the guitar playing, and he hears the sound, and he travels up to this part of his room where he left his guitar, and he blinks his eyes a couple times, and he thinks he's seeing something, but there's a ghost playing the guitar. And the kid asks, like, holy crap, like, are you real? And he's like, no, I'm dead. And the musician guy, he's playing the guitar, and he can't stop playing. That's his thing. And he reveals that he's like a blues artist. And this music that he's playing is blues music. And he did this throughout his life, and, you know, this is his guitar. He took it with him across the country, and he did music tours. And he just loves playing. And the kid's like, well, like, are you haunting me because I have your guitar? He's like, no, actually, I'm flattered. I want you to, like, play. He's like, well, I can't play. And he's like, well, I can show you how to play. So the kid starts playing the guitar. And he's not that good, but he realizes that his hands seem to be moving by themselves, and it's the guitarist helping him play the song. And he's like, oh, wow, this is cool. And the dead guitarist is like, hey, you want to be partners? And the guy's like, what do you mean? He's like, well, we can, you know, play music and, you know, go traveling and stuff. It'll be fun, right? And he's like, yeah, that'd be so cool. And the kid technically agrees to do it. So he makes a deal. The ghost wanders off, and then the end of the story happens where he starts playing the guitar, and, you know, at night when his parents are sleeping, and he can't stop playing. And there's a twist involved with that, and you get an ending that's played on some sitcom humor, and that's essentially the haunted guitar. This one was a cute little one. I would say this is like a little slightly decent story. It doesn't go to the lengths that some of the better ones in my mind go to. Like I said, I think it does have some solid ideas with it, with like the dead musician. But for the most part, it's just a decent one. The execution is kind of... So, yeah. The second story is called Tune In Tomorrow. And I would say that this is probably either my second or third favorite story in this collection. This story is kind of trying to play on the idea of a story within a story, right? So this girl, she's at home. It's during the summer. And she's bored out of her mind. There's nothing to do. For some reason, she can't hang out with her friends. I forget what the reason is. And she's having a lazy day. And her mom's like, hey, why don't you go find something to do? So the girl's bored, and she's like, well, where I grew up, you know, before I moved here to this place, we never had cable, but here we have to have cable to even watch TV. So I'm going to flip through the cable channels and just see what's on. And when she flips through, she finds a station with this soap opera playing. And the soap opera catches her attention, and she starts watching the soap opera. And whatever's happening around her in her surroundings, right? Stuff will be happening on the soap opera. So, like, for example, something will fall over in the soap opera, and then it'll happen in her house, but slightly changed, right? So it's almost like fiction is mirroring with reality a little bit. And she gets kind of weirded out, and but she likes it. She thinks it's a cool experience. And she tells her friends about it, about the soap opera, and they say, well, we've never heard of it. She's like, oh, well, you definitely need to check this out. And the next day, there's something else that she wants to do, but then she's like, you know what? The soap opera's supposed to be coming on around 1 o'clock, so I really want to watch this because I want to see what happens next in the story. And I don't want to spoil what the cliffhanger is because it kind of deals with the end of the story, so I'll just leave it ambiguous here. But there's something from the previous episode that left on a cliffhanger, and when she picks it up the next day, she figures out where the cliffhanger is going in the story. And she starts getting weirded out when she starts to put two and two together, like, this is, like, strangely connected to what's happening in my house and in my life. And there's kind of like a there's a mild fourth wall break as the twist of the story. And let's just say there's a story within a story within a story. I'm going to be very ambiguous with this because it's very easy to spoil what happens here. If I go into any specific detail, it's going to spoil the whole thing. But that's essentially Tune In Tomorrow. This story is very clever. I mean, it's a clever little one. I would say this is above average, lower end good. I was entertained with this one. It's not going to be for everybody. I think that from memory, this kind of reminds me of something like Be Afraid, Be Very Afraid. The story within a story concept can work when done well. I think this one would have been a great little episode back in the old Goosebumps show. They could have probably tweaked some elements and made it a little more scary or a little more surreal. But I think that's what makes the story work. It's a very surreal one, and I think most of you out there would enjoy this. So, yeah, this one was kind of cute. The third story is called Live Bait. However, and on paper, when I think about live bait, I'm like, okay, this story might sound up my alley. I'm afraid of fish. I have thalassophobia. And when we got, this is kind of, well, let's just talk about the story first. Well, these two boys are fishing one day. And they're fishing at this spot where, the two boys are talking about, oh, we can catch all these fish and it's going to be fun. But one of the boys, the main character, he's afraid of fish. And he doesn't want to be there. And he'd rather be doing something else. But his friend's like, come on, just fish, right? So they're fishing. And something happens to where they have to, trace their, fishing line or whatnot towards this end of this pier. And when they make it to the end of the pier, they see this shack there. And this shack may or may not have some bait inside of it. I think the thing was they try to trace their line and realize they ran out of bait. And so they go inside of this shack. And once they go inside, they start to feel kind of weird. And then one thing leads to another. And they find themselves in the midst of being around fish that are bigger than them. And this starts to freak them out, and they have a couple close calls with these big old fish. And once you get near the end of the story, you realize there's a twist involved with this shack. And there's an old man that comes out and says, hey boys, thank you for going fishing for me, essentially. And the boy's like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, here we like to use a certain thing like bait. And the story kind of ends after that with kind of a, hunky-dory joke type of ending. Like I said, this one's also easy to spoil. If I even give away one element of what happens in the shack to begin with, it's a spoiler. It's going to spoil the whole story for you. So I have to be very vague with some of these because some of these stories here are easier to spoil than normal Tales Give You Goosebumps stories. This one was, I guess, below average. I mean, almost decent. It had some fun moments to it, but it didn't live up to its full potential. I think there's better stories out there than this. So yeah, that's Live Bait. Now this one I can kind of go into more depth. This one's called Something Strange About Marcy. Now, from memory, I thought I used to hate this one because I've read this book in the past, and I remember hating something about this story, and I couldn't remember why. And then after rereading it, I definitely remember why now. But I don't really hate it now. So there's these girls, they're hanging out in the summer, and every time they hang out outside, there's this weird new girl named Marcy that seems to be following them around all the time. And she doesn't talk. She doesn't try to, greet herself to these girls. But they notice that she's always observing them. And it makes them feel uncomfortable. Which is understandable. If you have some creeper person you've never met before just watching you, that's scary. And that's pretty much what this whole story is predicated on, is being followed, being observed by something you don't know, or being stalked. So there's like stalking type of vibe, right? And this one girl, the main character, early on in the story, the friends are like talking about Marcy and like, look at this girl, she's weird. And throughout the story, every time this girl sees Marcy, she's getting like vibes from her. I'm like, she must be evil. Like there's something about her like that seems off. And once she gets by herself and Marcy starts observing her like through the bushes and stuff and following her through the woods, Marcy's carrying around this black case, not saying a word, right? So one day, after Marcy's been following her around, she's realized she's being followed in the woods, and she turns around and Marcy's just standing there without saying a word. She's holding a black case, and it looks like she's trying to take something out of it. So the main character is like, well, you know what? I'm gonna go try to talk with her. Maybe if I be friendly with her, she will stop acting so weird. But once she gets near her and she pulls out that black case, she gets spooked by this, preconceived notion about Marcy that she's evil, right? And she runs away in terror, right? So, eventually, near the end of the story, the main character's around her friends again, and Marcy's there again with the black case. And this time, Marcy actually says something to them. And they're caught off guard. She's like, oh, Marcy actually talked. And she pulls out something, and then the twist happens. And you figure out what Marcy's been holding, and the reality of the situation. Let's just put it that way. And the last sentence, I guess it would be the last page and page and a half, right? Is just a big old wet fart. It's so left field and weird. I mean, it makes sense kind of when you think about the perspective of what this last sentence is implying for these characters. But it's just really dumb. This one, it's cute, but I think it's a below average one. I don't hate it. It's more meh. It's just a very meh one. Kind of like the one before it. What was that one? Live Bait. That one's kind of meh. So yeah, yeah. The next one's probably my least favorite in the whole book. I'm just going to put it out there. This one's called Ghost Sitter. And now it has a fine setup, right? These two guys, they're brothers. They move down to the end of this street, this like decrepit looking street in this neighborhood, this town they haven't lived in before. And they're new kids. And they're moving in during the summer because this is a summertime book. And they have pretty much two houses at the end of the street. It's their house. This is old fixer-upper house that their parents want to do. And they have this neighbor's house, which is, the yard is disheveled. The house looks in disarray. And they actually believe there's nobody living there, right? That's what the boys believe. Well, when they're hanging around these kids are mentioning a legend, or I guess a town legend, about they have a real haunted house, and they're mentioning the street, and the boys are like, wait, we live on that street. And then they say down a specific location on the street, and they're like, we live exactly there. And there's a correlation that one of the kids, one of their peers makes, is like the house on the left or the house on the right. Well, they believe that their house is on the right, and they're talking about the house on the left. So they assume that they're talking about their neighbor's house is the one that's haunted. And they get spooked out. They're like, okay. And they get home, and the mom drops a bombshell on the boys, saying that the neighbors next door, which is supposed to be the house on the left, are going away on a trip, and they need the boys to come down for the weekend, on the weekend to, kind of house sit during the day and at night. And the boys are like, wait, we have neighbors? And wait, why did you tell us we can do that? I mean, we want to hang out with people this weekend. And the mom's like, come on, just do it. I already promised them that you can do it. So the boys are reluctantly, apprehensive. Justifiably, they hear this haunting legend and they have to go to the house next door. Well, it's Saturday, the main day they have to do this. And they go next door, and they're given a key, and they enter the house. And when they enter the house, there's creaky floorboards, cobwebs everywhere, but something feels completely off. And they can't put their finger on it. and they think they experience something weird. So they go back, after their morning, checkup, and they don't tell their parents about what happened to them in the house because they don't want to get their parents all riled up. And it's kind of like an anti-you gotta believe me, which is kind of cool. I actually like that setup. An anti-you gotta believe me. Well, at night, they have to go back, right? And so they, decide to go back, and they're like, we're going to find out what was causing what they were experiencing in the house. And when they go there, there's a big old plot twist involving neighbors that may or may not have come back home. And once the neighbors come back home, they explain what they thought they've been experiencing, and it's really dumb. It's super dumb. I was just so angry when I read this part because I didn't remember a lot about the story, but that twist was really stupid. And after they hear that, they're like, well, okay, well, I guess we got normal neighbors, And then the very ending happens where they meet up with their friends that told them about the legend, and they're like, oh, wait, we might have made a mistake here. We meant to say this house. And the kids think back to something that was kind of mentioned. I don't want to spoil it. Since their family is like fixing up the house, they think back to something that happened in their house, and they're like, oh, snap. And that's essentially Ghost Sitter, right? Ghost Sitter is an easy to spoil story, so I went kind of vague with it. This one was probably the most disappointing one. I love the atmosphere to it, but once you get to that reveal, it was just really dumb and really kiddish. I would say this one's another meh one, below average. Don't hate it or anything. I think the atmosphere does help it a little bit, but yeah, I was not a fan of that one. So yeah, and then the next story after that, the sixth story, is called Fun with Spelling. Now, Fun with Spelling has been confirmed to be ghost written. Now, I forget the author's name, but it's one of the two, I think, Tales Give Me Goosebumps stories next to Why I Hate Jack Frost. It's been confirmed to be ghost written. And this one was kind of fun. It's more fun in a mean-spirited way, and I'm not the biggest fan on mean-spirited stories, but hear me out. So this girl has her eccentric aunt visiting her, house, and her aunt's staying in her room. She wears like garlic necklaces and stuff. She's kind of an occultist type, and she's into like practicing I guess pagan witch prayers and stuff. It's kind of an unorthodox beginning of a story, and I was really intrigued at first. So the aunt is like saying, okay, today's a good day to fly back home, and she leaves, and the girl's trying to get rid of that garlic smell out of her room, and she's thinking about stuff, and she's talking about some hobbies that she used to have. She used to have one hobby, and then she had another one. She explains why she has multiple hobbies is because she gets bored very easily, and she just likes to start new things to kind of just make it fresh. And her new thing is magic, and she wants a magic book, right? And she finds a book under her pillow from her aunt that apparently was left to her, saying, I think you might enjoy this. And it ends up being a book of spells. And she's really enamored by this, and she's scrolling through the book, noticing all the different types of spells. And then she comes across a section of spells that gives her some inspiration. And she's like, oh, this will be fun to use against people. And she brings up this girl that she does not like, and her and this girl kind of like have this catty relationship. And she's like, you know what? I'm going to use this spell on this girl and see what happens, just to see if it works. And how do you get the spell to work is you have to write exactly what you want and who you want this to be done to. You put it into a glass jar, you spit on it, and then seal it. And that's supposed to make the spell come to action. And the first spell she casts is, I think, a forgetfulness spell, which causes her rival to forget her homework. And she's always the type that she's like a brown nose to her teacher. She's always turning her homework in on time. She forgets that and makes her look bad. So now after, she makes a comment to the girl and the girl snaps back at her, she's like, well, since she snapped back at me, I'm going to get back at her again. And she comes up with another spell. And the other spell involves a really, really silly spell, but essentially she casts a spell that will make her burp when she's trying to talk, right? And this makes her rival really embarrassed in front of everybody. Everybody's laughing at her, and she's like now feeling on cloud nine. And then she comes home one day, and there's this thing about her sister where she thinks her sister is trying to steal her spell book, right? Well, she scolds her little sister for trying to steal her spell book, but she ends up finding it anyway. And then she finds one last spell, and she finds this create your own spell. And she wants to put a spell on her rival one last time, and she thinks it'll be funny to essentially make her rival want to think that she can fly every time that somebody says her name. So she does the create your own spell, spits in the jar, writes it down, spits in the jar, seals it, and hopes for the best. The next day, when roll's being called by her teacher, her rival's name gets called, and she may or may not be trying to fly. And then as everybody's laughing, they see that this girl maybe actually is flying and flies out of the class. And this, makes her feel really bad and really guilty. And the girl rushes home to get her spell book to fix the spell because she doesn't want this girl to get hurt. She was just trying to get some revenge, which is noble of her. But when she gets home, there's a big revelation dealing with something. And I don't want to spoil it, but it essentially involves the sister. And you get like a coup d'etat, rug pulled from under you type of twist ending. And it's essentially fun with spelling. For a mean-spirited story, I think the character did kind of feel some remorse, so I can look past it. But this one was all right. This one was more okay, not maybe closer to light decent, not too gung ho about it. So the one after that, this one had some fun moments to it. Matt's Lunchbox. This is probably my second favorite story in this collection here. This one was really fun and creative, even though it has a lot of gremlins in the heart of it. You've kind of seen this story before. But this one was kind of cool. So this boy named Matt, he plays sports, and one day he forgets his lunchbox on his bus. And he tells his mom that he needs a new lunchbox. So his mom goes to like 4 different stores and finds this lunchbox, a bright red one with a bunch of monsters chasing a kid on the front of it. And Matt's like, this lunchbox looks lame. And his mom's like, you better not complain because I had to go to 4 stores to get you that. So this is your new lunchbox. So Matt's like, okay, whatever. But soon after he gets the lunchbox, he starts hearing some noises come out of it. And there's something that happens, and it's essentially revealed that there's these monsters inside of his lunchbox that are ravenously hungry. And they essentially try to eat him at first, which is kind of scary. And Matt's like, don't eat me, don't eat me. And he's like, they're like, well, feed us. So Matt gets the idea to go down and raid his pantry and feed him a bunch of snacks. And they, of course, gobble it all up. But they still remain hungry. And they keep pressuring Matt for more food. And Matt's like, okay, I'll get you more food. Well, as the story goes on, Matt, he keeps getting all the snacks away. His mom makes him meals, and he hasn't eaten because every time he gets food in front of him, his monsters now follow him and pop up wherever he's trying to eat and steal his food. So he's becoming like malnourished, and he's becoming, starving essentially. And his mom's like, wow, you keep eating all this food. And he's like, yeah, it's just so delicious. And he can't even ask for seconds without these monsters taking it from him, right? So it comes to the point in the story where he's like, look, I gotta eat. Can you guys let me eat something? And they're like, you know what? We can let you eat once we're not hungry anymore. And he's like, but you guys are never not hungry. And they're like, exactly. You're gonna starve forever. And there's an ending. It's kind of ambiguous, but I think it's a cool little twist. So essentially, there's this idea that if you're able to get rid of the lunchbox, if the new, it depends on who the owner is, that these monsters will take all their food. Well, he comes up with this idea to get rid of the lunchbox, and he may or may not succeed in it. Um, and then the ending, like I said, is kind of ambiguous, and it's kind of cool. So that's essentially Matt's lunchbox. I don't want to spoil that mechanism part where he tries to get rid of the lunchbox, because if I go into too much, it will completely spoil the ending for you. But this one was pretty good. This one was, I would say, actually good. This was a good one. Low good, but I'll come back to this book for that. So the eighth story is called Stuck in 1957. This is kind of a time travel story. This one's probably, it's down there with this book. Down there with Ghost Sitter and Something Strange About Marcy. Just a really meh one. But this girl, she just moved into a house, and she's really fixated with her hair. She likes her hair. And that's pretty much all we get out of her character. And she's looking around her new room, and she finds these glasses. And they look like really old 1950s glasses. And when she puts them on, she's able to go back in time, right? But the problem is that when these glasses are only good with taking her back in time, not forward in time when she takes them off. So when she goes back in time, she realizes that she's in a different time period. Her room has changed. It appears to be the 1950s. Since the book was made in 1997, I guess going back to 1957 would be like 40 years in the past. So, she went pretty far back, relative. And she feels out of place, and everybody around her looks weird, and she definitely looks out of place with her hairstyle and everything. And she pretty much gets pressured to get a haircut, and she hates her haircut badly. Like, she thinks her hair looks terrible, her bangs look awful, and then if she ever makes it back home, everybody's going to make fun of her. And she really feels upset until she befriends this boy. And this boy tells her, well, I may have this thing from the future. And when they go to see what this thing is, it's a helmet. And there's something written on the helmet that says, made in Hawaii, USA. And since it was 1957, Hawaii was not a state yet. So the girl's like, okay, well, this has to be from the future. And essentially, she puts the helmet back on and travels back to the present. But she's kept, her new hairstyle. And when she gets there, she's so in vain about herself and her looks and everything that she realizes that instead of going to school to face ridicule about her goofy looking 50s hairstyle, she'd rather go back in time and deal, with living there. So there's a twist involved that is kind of dumb. So I'm just going to leave it at that. This one's a very short and very surface level story as is. I mean, that's pretty much all the story has to offer. This one was really meh. I was not a fan of this. I don't like the character at all. I think she's too superficial, and yeah. I mean, arguably this is down there with Ghost Sitter, but I just, Ghost Sitter makes me angry more. So this one's a really meh one. The next one, Mirror Mirror on the Wall. If you've read Let's Get Invisible or Ghost in the Mirror, it's essentially that story again. Pretty much at this point, anytime you see mirror stories in these kids' horror books, they're always going to deal with some type of clone or mirror universe. And this one's no different. So this girl, she's like a popular 12-year-old girl. And, she likes to make social appearances. And one day she wants to go out to the mall. But her brother, is a messy kind of kid, gets mud all over her clothes she wants to wear to the mall. And this really pisses her off. And her brother skedaddles. But when she's trying to, take her clothes and find something else to wear, or maybe go clean them off, she thinks she sees her reflection moving in the mirror. And she's like, that can't be happening. I'm standing still. So she goes over to her mirror, and the mirror, pinches her. And this freaks her out. And then essentially, there's this big revelation with this mirror that there might be something supernatural living inside of it. And the main character and her reflection, or I guess clone, start fighting, right? And during the fight, she accidentally breaks the mirror and sets even more clones out in the open. And this makes her panic, and I think her brother and her mom get involved. And this is one of the few times where a parent and a sibling gets involved when these type of stories, right? So you got all these clones coming around witnessing these things going on, and she finds this handheld mirror that she thinks is able to work. And this is kind of from Ghost in the Mirror, and I think, you know, in hindsight, since this was made before Ghost in the Mirror, I think that story actually took some elements from this. But there's a handheld mirror involved, and that seems to potentially solve the issue. Well, near the end of the story, there's another mirror that she comes into contact with, and there's a big bombshell revealed about her character and how she may or may not be who we think she is, and or where she is. Let's put it that way. Everything might not seem like it should be, and that's essentially Mirror, Mirror on the Wall. It's to be expected. It's very, I guess, in this type of story, it is kind of nuanced by the book, by the text. But there are some things to kind of make it stand out, with like the parent being involved and the, you know, sibling being involved. But other than that, you know, been there, done that. This one was all right. Okay, it was an okay one. But the last one, the very last one, What's Cooking? Easily one of the best short stories I think I've ever read in Tales Give You Goosebumps. This is definitely one I would come back for. And I don't want to spoil this one too much. I'm going to keep it surface level like the rest, because this, for some reason, the stories in this book are super easy to spoil. So these two friends, they are stuck in summer school, right? They don't want to be in summer school, especially at the location they're at, because the school has a legend that goes back to the, like, I guess 1940s, where there was this sadistic lunch lady called Chop Suey was said to have, you know, made meat surprise with kids' body parts. And it was said in a legend, right, that she went mad one day and cleaved to death a bunch of kids. And, of course, she died soon after. And I don't want to spoil her death, because that's actually really good. I want you to be surprised on that. So she essentially dies. And ever since she died, there is an urban legend kind of reminiscent to, you know, Bloody Mary or the Candyman movies, where if you change her name 3 times, it's said that she's supposed to come back and haunt you. Well, the kids don't buy into that, and they say, why not? You know, we'll break down and say the names, because this can't be real. Well, first thing happens with one of the kids where they get a sandwich that has some mystery meat inside of it, right? And then there's another event that happens that's kind of scary as well. I don't want to spoil it. And then a third thing happens where there's this new woman working at the lunch counter at their summer school, and the woman seems to be following them around, and they get really creeped out, and you know, she's cooking up something weird, and they get this bad vibe from her, and essentially just want to leave school and not deal with her, right? So the next day, they come back, and, you know, they find out what they find out about this lunch lady, and they put 2 and 2 together that this woman that showed up may or may not be the woman from the Chop Suey legend. So they call her out on that, and the lunch lady may or may not start chasing them down with a meat cleaver. And these kids are freaking out, and they come up with this idea that maybe might take them out of the situation. And when they do this thing, it seems to work. Until the ending, where they fast forward, you know, to that night, and they're out at a restaurant, and, you know, I think it's an Asian restaurant, and let's just say something else happens that feels like the beginning of the story. You know, in some regards, this is kind of one of those books where the kids technically don't learn from the mistakes they made. But I think it was done cleverly here, and I'll let it slide. But this one was really good. This one was really scary. I mean, I have really no complaints with this. This was essentially perfect. Really dark and gory one. So yeah, that's what's cooking. So yeah, all in all with this book, this one was kind of bleak. I mean, a bunch of mess stories. I think, like I said, my least favorites are, there's kind of a three-way tie almost. You got Ghost Sitter, Something Strange About Marcy, and Stuck in 1957 are all big old duds. Then you got some decent ones like The Haunted Guitar and, you know, I guess, some aspects of Fun with Spelling is decent. And then you got some good ones, like Tune In Tomorrow was good, Matt's Lunchbox is good. Live Bait is kind of whatever. Mirror Mirror on the Walls, kind of whatever. And then What's Cooking is clearly the best one. So yeah, this one is just more. There's nothing terrible like some other books I've reviewed in the past, but it's just mostly just mediocre. Like three of them I would probably come back for, and the rest I just don't care for. But you know, for it just having one standout compared to the book 6 and book 2, which had like 2 standouts for me, I think I put this one lower than those slightly. I don't think this is a bad book, so it's not getting below a 3. But I don't see me giving this thing higher than a 3.4, so it's going to be between a 3 to 3.4. And where I settled with this, because I decided not to give this book any bonus points, is I gave this book about a 3.1 out of 5. I deducted 1.9 points off just for the mediocrity of the book. In my opinion, I think this is the weakest Tales that I've read. Nothing bad, nothing terrible. It's a fine one. But What's Cooking is definitely the standout. You need to try that story. So yeah, that's my thoughts about More and More Tales to Give You Goosebumps, or also known as Tales to Give You Goosebumps Book 5. Let me know down in the comment section. Did you like this book? Did you not like this book? What was your favorite story? What was your least favorite story? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.